Nashville Public Radio serves Middle Tennessee in many ways every day, including through this podcast. You can support it by leaving a review or rating, by telling a friend about it, or by contributing at wpln.org/give.
This is the Nashvillager podcast. It's February 24th, 2026. On this day in 1803, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling that made possible the practice of judicial review. That's what it's called when someone sues the executive or legislative branch of government over a policy or law, bringing the courts in to decide whether the measure complies with the Constitution. I'm LaTanya Turner in for Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. The case of Marbury versus Madison began when outgoing President John Adams started the process of appointing a bunch of new judges and justices of the peace, but couldn't finish the red tape before his political rivals, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, took over the administration. As you might expect, they didn't love Adams' choices. When they took office, there was just one step left to put those people on the bench. As Secretary of State, Madison was supposed to deliver their commissions. He did not. One of the appointees sued. The Constitution established the concept of checks and balances in broad strokes, but did not specifically state that the courts had a say in a case like that. So in its decision, the Supreme Court had to specifically rule on the idea of the court issuing a ruling at all. Chief Justice John Marshall put it this way in his opinion: "It is emphatically the duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is." It's remarkable how similar the situation for that first test of the judicial review concept was to the many examples of it being used in Tennessee today. In those first years of the 19th century, even though our political parties hadn't truly coalesced into the kind we know today, partisan divides were still bitter and very intense. The transition from President Adams to President Jefferson was a huge changing of the guard. And even figures we tend to remember as great thinkers or leaders or high-minded idealists got involved in gamesmanship that can feel kind of distasteful. Altogether, that meant that when one camp was in power, folks in the other camp could feel like they had no voice in the way things were run. It made the opportunity for judicial review all the more important as a measured process that could cut through the noise and consider all the arguments for and against a law or other government action. Fast forward to today in our own state. With a GOP supermajority in the General Assembly and a Republican governor, Democrats and the communities they represent in state government can have a hard time registering their opposition to bills as they move through the legislative process to become law, which is why it's starting to seem as though the normal order of things is for the state to pass a controversial law, only for it to be put on pause as the law is challenged in court. Think of all those measures passed a few years ago to give the state a say over metro boards like the airport and sport authorities. Nashville leaders sued over all of them. One of those lawsuits, the one challenging the law that seeks to limit the size of metro government, is currently in the hands of Tennessee's Supreme Court. And then there are the lawsuits brought by advocacy organizations or affected individuals. One of those, the case against a Tennessee law banning gender-affirming care for minors, made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court last year. The court gave its okay to that one. But there are others still in the works. The suit filed by parents with the Education Law Center and Southern Poverty Law Center taking issue with Tennessee's Universal School Voucher Program. The legal challenge filed by groups including the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, challenging the relatively new state law that makes it a felony to shelter or help undocumented immigrants. or the separate lawsuit brought by the ACLU and others over another anti-immigration measure, the law that penalizes local leaders who vote for so-called sanctuary policies. That's hardly an exhaustive list. It's just the most recent of the higher-profile cases. The point is that judicial review has become a major part of the way things work in Tennessee these days. Obviously, none of this is new. Like I said earlier, judicial review became a thing more than 200 years ago, but it has become more frequent. And a few years ago, state leaders changed the first step in that process. Prior to 2021, these lawsuits began the same way that any other lawsuit does in Tennessee, a regular case in a regular courtroom overseen by a single judge. Because Nashville is the state capital, those cases were generally filed in Davidson County's Chancery Court. A lot of times, they ended up on the same judge's docket, and people who didn't like that judge's rulings started to voice concerns that the system gave one person too much power. That led to creation of what we have now, a special process for appointing a 3-judge panel whenever a lawsuit challenges Tennessee laws. At first, the court where a suit is filed goes through its normal process to assign the case to one of its judges. But then the state's high court appoints 2 other judges so that there ends up being one from each of Tennessee's grand divisions, East, West, and Middle. They preside over the case together, and much like an appeals court panel or the Supreme Court, after all the hearings are over, they vote on a ruling. And in the 5 years since that process was established, it has gotten a lot of use. In just a few minutes, how Tennessee is finding more housing for children in state custody in jail-like settings. That's coming up after the newscast.
Best journalism in the nation. That's an apt description for a lot of what you hear on WPLN News. The proof this spring is in the array of journalism awards coming in. The Supermajority podcast won 3 national contests. Our investigative reporting, partnered with ProPublica, was named some of the best education coverage in the country. And for arts and culture, This Is Nashville and our music journalism are being honored on the national stage. We're proud, and you can be too.
For WPLN News in Nashville, I'm LaTanya Turner. We're 1 month out from the devastating impacts of Winter Storm Fern. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams reports that this week, city, state, and community leaders began to investigate Nashville's response.
The 9-person group is tasked with taking a hard look at how city agencies, and in particular, the Nashville Electric Service, responded to the storm. NES has faced intense scrutiny after hundreds of thousands of Nashvillians went days without power. And in her report to the commission, CEO Teresa Broyles-Applin made it clear that much of this criticism was warranted.
Through the storm, we did not provide the level of service and communications that our customers have come to expect from NES.
State lawmakers have looked to take action, like firing Broyles-Applin or making changes to the NES board. Some Democratic lawmakers have urged their colleagues to wait until the Winter Storm Commission has finished. The commission chair, former Governor Phil Bredesen, said that the investigation could be a chance for the city and state to restore trust.
I've watched from the outside over the years the relationship of the city and the state kind of come apart. And I think this is an opportunity to maybe do some rebuilding.
The group is required to issue its initial findings in 6 months and make recommendations within the year. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
Nashville's Department of Transportation has a new person in charge. Philip Jones, NDOT's deputy director, has now been named acting director. The appointment took place after the department's previous leader, Diana Alarcon, handed in her resignation last week. In a statement, Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell expressed his gratitude for her, quote, time, energy, and dedication. The reasons for Alarcon's departure was not clear in the release. The shift comes at a critical time for NDOT. Nashville is in the early stages of rolling out its Choose How You Move plan and overhaul to the city's transit system. Many of these changes fall within NDOT's purview. 3 sites operated by Metro Parks have closed due to structural concerns. The gymnasiums at the Shelby Park Community Center and Easley Community Center, plus part of the Centennial Park's Performing Arts Center, shuttered last week after their beams showed cracking from the ice storm. The Nashville Banner reports that some Metro Council members have reacted strongly to this news, questioning the department's budgeting, especially as Metro Parks said they had been inspecting the facilities. Currently, there is no timeline for repairing or reopening. The Boring Company met with Nashville city officials last week about its plans to build a tunnel system between downtown and the airport. More than half a year into the project, this was the first public meeting with city officials. WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports it was also the first chance for citizens to formally weigh in.
Boring Company Vice President David Buss started off the meeting with a sales pitch.
It is an express travel directly from where you board to your final destination.
He pointed to Boring's only other tunnel project in Las Vegas as a proof of concept. Some attendees weren't convinced. Nashville resident Josh Wesley said the company has only finished about 5 miles of tunnels in 7 years.
But we're supposed to believe they'll get 10 miles done here by next year?
Also in response to the sales pitch, local Craig Bardot pointed out that the city council was not evaluating a proposal. This project has been slowly advancing through government procedures, and he says the council was giving an illusion of inevitability.
You're normalizing a decision structured around the preferences of a decadent billionaire class, not the needs of Nashville residents.
He suggested the meeting didn't give any real accountability to a company owned by billionaire Elon Musk. Many city council members asked what have been unanswered questions, but Boring leaders navigated around them or promised to answer them later in an email. Some council members seemed to agree with Bardot's sentiment. Delisha Porterfield said the Boring Company refused to meet with city officials publicly until she filed a resolution to formally oppose the project. And then during the meeting, Boring leaders didn't offer any new information that wasn't already on their website. And she says some of the information they provided was false.
The administration is fact-checking in real time, telling us that what they're sharing is not true. So I don't understand. At this juncture, I don't understand how anybody in this space could still be supportive of this project.
Porterfield's resolution is scheduled to be voted on at the council's March 3rd meeting. The resolution, as some citizens have noted, is mostly a symbolic gesture. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org.
With WPLN News in Nashville, I'm Tony Gonzalez. There is a new study out about juvenile justice in Tennessee, and specifically about the facilities that are involved in the juvenile justice system. How much space is there? How many beds are there? Is the system equipped for all of the youth who are going to be going through the court process? This is a high-profile report that is long awaited and that comes at a time of intense scrutiny for the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. Following along with all of this in recent years is WPLN criminal justice reporter Paige Flager. She's here with me now. Thanks for being here, Paige.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about this report. Why is Tennessee looking into this part of its juvenile justice system?
Lawmakers ordered for this group called the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, also known as TASER. They ordered for researchers at TASER to take a look at juvenile bed space. This is for kids who are awaiting their court dates, so the pre-adjudication kids, and then post-adjudication kids, kids who under the juvenile court system have been essentially convicted of a crime.
Okay, so this is a group that is known for really rigorous reports, but also put this in context. What kind of environment are we in for juvenile justice and a report like this?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because this report is about whether or not there's enough beds for kids in our juvenile justice system, but it's all kind of tucked under this umbrella of a nationwide and also a Tennessee-wide decrease in juvenile crime. However, there are certain crimes in Tennessee specifically that we do see an increase in. Those crimes, though, can be tied oftentimes back to the legislature. So an example, we see an increase in children committing crimes with guns, oftentimes guns that they are finding in unlocked vehicles. Well, in 2013, as we've talked about many times on WPLN, the legislature passed a law that allowed people to carry guns in their cars like an extension of their home. We also see, they point out in the report, Tennessee's threats of mass violence law, which is something that we've also reported on in partnership with ProPublica, where kids are being charged with felonies and scooped up into the justice system for saying things at school that are being interpreted as mass threats.
Okay, so that's the environment and the trends that we're looking at. So what are some of the findings, or I don't know if they do it as recommendations in the report?
Yeah, so one of the main findings is that there is not enough of that pre-adjudication, so kids awaiting court dates, bed space, specifically in West Tennessee. So that was one of the big findings, was that there's just not enough place for courts in the Western District of our state to hold kids as they're awaiting those court dates. There's also a finding about the post-adjudication bed space, so kids who have been convicted of those crimes, that basically finds that because of a 2023 DCS real estate plan, so this is a multi-million-dollar plan where DCS is going to be using a bunch of money to build more facilities, especially these high secure facilities, think barbed wire, cells that lock, that type of thing. So DCS is already in the works in making moves on building those facilities. And the Tasser report essentially finds that once those beds are available, that should solve for the bed space problem with post-adjudication kids.
So you mentioned DCS, bed space. I want to make sure we're understanding here and connecting these dots. Where does a young person go if there isn't bed space? I mean, hasn't this been a big challenge for the state?
Yes. So obviously everyone has heard about children who are in DCS custody sleeping in office buildings or
state office buildings.
In state office building, yes. And there was a recent comptroller's audit of DCS that found in one case a child was staying in DCS offices for more than 100 days while awaiting placements. So there is this struggle to find kids appropriate placements for some of their needs, whether those are behavioral or mental health or other types of therapeutic needs. Finding that space, DCS has been saying, is a big difficulty.
Okay, so Tasser is making these recommendations. The lawmakers asked for this research. So what happens next? I mean, will they be acted upon? Is there something specific that we want to watch for next?
So the report ends... The final note is that they're recommending more oversight of these juvenile facilities writ large across the system. And they mention our reporting about the Richard L. Bean Center in Knoxville and a law that was introduced after that reporting came out that wanted to place more oversight over the juvenile justice system in the hands of people who were not DCS. So wanting to give that to a separate third-party entity. And so this report circles back to that and says there needs to be more oversight of our juvenile justice system and our juvenile justice facilities in Tennessee. Whether or not lawmakers do anything about that is a question that remains to be seen.
Paige Flager covers criminal justice for WPLN. You can find more of her reporting on our website, WPLN.org, and listen out for updates on that legislation and more topics with juvenile justice.
Thanks for listening to the Nashvillager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.